He told me another man was more of a father to him than I ever was. I smiled and handed him his inheritance, an early one, a DNA test proving he was right. 20 years of lies, betrayal, and raising a son who wasn't mine, my late brother's son. They wanted the truth. They were about to get it. My name is David Collins. I'm 47 years old, and for 22 of those years, I served our country as a logistics coordinator in the Marine Corps. I've seen combat in Iraq and Afghanistan. I've managed supply chains under enemy fire, and I thought I could handle anything life threw at me. Turns out, the one enemy I never saw coming was sleeping in my own bed. I met Tiffany at a 4th of July barbecue back in 2003. She was 24, a dental hygienist with blonde hair that caught the sunlight and a laugh that could make you forget all your problems. I was on leave, fresh from my second tour, and she seemed like everything I was fighting to protect. A small town, all American girl with traditional values. Or so I thought. We were married 8 months later. Fast? Maybe. But when you stare death in the face overseas, you learn not to waste time on what matters. Jaden arrived 10 months after the wedding. Perfect timing, everyone said. A healthy baby boy with Tiffany's blue eyes and what everyone claimed was my stubborn chin. Then Mateo came along 3 years later, different as night and day from his older brother. Where Jaden was serious and calculating, Mateo was pure heart, loyal to a fault. Even as a little kid, he'd follow me around the garage like a shadow, handing me tools and asking a million questions about whatever I was fixing. The first sign that something was wrong came when Jaden turned 15. I was planning this whole father-son camping trip to Yellowstone, something I'd promised him since he was little. But when I brought it up at dinner, he just shrugged and said he'd rather hang out with his friends. Fair enough, I thought. Teenagers, right? But then I started to notice the way he looked at me when I spoke, not with the typical teenage eye roll, but with something colder. Like he was studying me, judging me, and finding me lacking. Whenever I'd tell stories about my service or try to teach him basic life skills, he'd get this expression, like he was tolerating some old fool who didn't know what he was talking about. Tiffany started to change around the same time. She'd always been social, but suddenly she was going out more. Book clubs, yoga classes, girls' nights that stretched later and later. Her phone suddenly had a password. When I asked about it, she laughed it off, saying she was protecting her work contacts. Seemed reasonable enough. The real red flag should have been when she started working late at the dental practice. 3, sometimes 4 nights a week. Dr. Patterson's office was supposedly expanding, taking on more patients, which meant more responsibility for her. The extra money was good, I'll admit. It helped pay for Jaden's private school and Mateo's baseball equipment. But looking back, I realize I was paying for my own destruction. Every late night, every unexplained expense, every time she came home smelling of a different cologne, masked by too much perfume. I was funding the very betrayal that would eventually shatter my family. The worst part is, Mateo saw it too. My youngest would sometimes ask why mom was gone so much, why she seemed different when she came home. I'd just ruffle his hair and tell him mom was working hard for the family, shielding him from a truth I wasn't ready to face myself. The garage had always been my sanctuary. 20 years of organizing tools, rebuilding engines, and finding peace in the smell of motor oil and steel. But that night, Standing amongst my carefully arranged equipment, I felt like a stranger in my own space. Tiffany had just gotten in from another late meeting, her excuse paper thin. She barely acknowledged me, just grabbed a glass of wine and disappeared upstairs. Jaden was in his room, probably texting his friends about how boring his old man was. Only Mateo had bothered to say goodnight, giving me that worried look he'd been wearing more often lately. I opened the old file cabinet where I kept important papers, insurance documents, military records, birth certificates. My hands moved automatically to the bottom drawer, to an envelope I had hidden there 17 years ago and tried to forget existed. Back then, Tiffany had taken a weekend trip to visit her college roommate in Denver. At least, that's what she told me. She came back different, though, distant, wearing a necklace I'd never seen before, talking about restaurants in Denver I knew her friend couldn't afford. Something in my gut told me to dig deeper. Military training teaches you to trust your instincts, to investigate anomalies. So, I did what any suspicious husband would do. I collected a few of Jaden's hairs from his brush, got my own DNA sample, and sent them off to a lab. But when the results came back, I couldn't bring myself to open them. Jaden was 3 years old. He called me Daddy. He'd climb all over me, laughing when I made airplane noises. How could I shatter that innocence? How could I risk destroying what could have been a perfect family over a suspicion, over jealousy? So, I sealed the envelope and buried it in my file cabinet, a landmine I hoped would never detonate. Now, 17 years later, I pulled it out with trembling hands. The paper felt heavier than it should, weighted with years of doubt and fear. I stared at it under the harsh garage light, my heart hammering against my ribs. Mateo appeared in the doorway, wearing his pajamas, and that worried expression I knew all too well. "Dad," he said softly, "you okay? You've been out here for a couple of hours." I looked at my youngest son, really looked at him. The kid who actually wanted to spend time with me, who helped with projects without being asked, who defended me when Jaden made a sarcastic comment. "Yeah, buddy," I answered, sliding the envelope back into the drawer. "Just thinking about some old stuff. You should get to bed." "Are you and Mom okay?" Mateo asked, stepping closer. "You guys seem different lately." Smart kid. Too smart sometimes. I wanted to protect him from what I was starting to suspect, but I also knew he deserved honesty. "Sometimes grown-ups go through tough times," I told him. "But no matter what happens, you know I love you, right?" "Of course," Mateo said instantly. "I love you too, Dad. More than anything." Those words hit me harder than I expected. Here was one son who actually meant it when he said he loved me, while upstairs was another who could barely stand to be in the same room. After Mateo went to bed, I stood there, staring at that file cabinet, knowing that sooner or later, I had to open that envelope and face whatever truth was waiting inside. The envelope felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds in my hands. 20 years of marriage, 20 years of raising a son who might not be mine, 20 years of living what could be a complete lie. The garage was dead silent, except for the hum of the fluorescent light above. I tore it open in one swift motion, like ripping off a Band-Aid. The lab report was clinical, factual, and devastating. Probability of paternity, 0%. Zero. Not a fraction. No margin for error. No maybes. Jaden was not my son. I sat down heavily on my workbench stool, the paper trembling in my hands. 17 years ago, I had suspected something was wrong. but I had chosen love over truth, hope over evidence. Now, the evidence was staring back at me with cold, scientific certainty. My brother. Tommy's face flashed in my mind. He'd been on leave around the time Jaden was conceived, staying with us for 2 weeks while he figured out his next assignment. Tommy had always been the charmer, the one who could make any woman laugh. I had trusted him completely. The garage door creaked open, and Mateo walked in, rubbing his eyes. "Dad," he called softly. "I heard something fall. You sure you're okay?" I quickly folded the paper and stuffed it in my pocket. My youngest son didn't need to know about this. Not yet. Maybe never. "Just dropped a wrench," I replied, forcing my voice to sound normal. "What are you doing up, buddy?" "Couldn't sleep," Mateo said, walking over to lean against my workbench. "Mom and Jaden were arguing about something upstairs. She was telling him he needs to be nicer to you." Too little, too late. But I appreciated Tiffany's effort, even if it was likely more about keeping up appearances than genuine concern. "What do you think of your brother?" I asked, curious from Mateo's perspective. Mateo shrugged, choosing his words carefully, as he always did. "He's different from us," he said finally. "Sometimes it's like he doesn't really feel like part of our family, you know? Like he's just visiting or something." Smart kid. Smarter than I gave him credit for. Even at 17, he could sense what I'd been too blind to see. "But you feel like part of this family, right?" I asked him. "Of course," Mateo answered without hesitation. "You're my dad. This is my home. I can't imagine being anywhere else." Those words were a lifeline in a storm. While everything else was crumbling around me, I still had one son who truly belonged with me, who wanted to be here, who valued what we had built together. After Mateo went back to bed, I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Stephen Riley, my old friend from the Marines who'd gone to law school after his service. If anyone could help me navigate what came next, it was Steve. The call went straight to voicemail, but I left a message. "Steve, it's David Collins," I said, my voice low. "I need your help with something. Urgent. Family matter. Call me back when you get this, no matter the hour." Stephen called back at 0600, just as I was finishing my third cup of coffee and staring at the DNA results I'd spread across the kitchen table. Military habits die hard, and neither of us was ever much for sleeping in. "David," Stephen said, his lawyer voice already all business. "What's going on? Your message sounded serious." I laid out the situation as clinically as I could. The old suspicions, the DNA test, the results. Stephen listened without interrupting, the way he used to listen to mission briefings in Afghanistan. "Jesus, David," Stephen said when I was done. 20 years. How are you holding up?" "I'm functional," I replied, which was Marine speak for barely holding it together. "What I need to know is my legal standing, assets, custody, everything." "Can you be at my office this morning?" Stephen asked. "We need to go over everything in detail. Bank accounts, property, retirement benefits. If you're serious about this, we need to move fast and smart." I was serious. 20 years of deception deserved a proportional response. Tiffany came downstairs as I was gathering the papers, dressed for another day at the dental office. She looked tired, older than her 44 years. "You're up early," she commented, pouring herself some coffee. "Couldn't sleep," I answered truthfully. She sat down across from me, and for a moment I saw a flash of the woman I married. before the lies, before the betrayal, before all of it. David, we need to talk, Tiffany said quietly. About us, about the boys, about where we're going. The timing would have been perfect if this conversation had happened yesterday. Now, it just felt like she was trying to close the barn door after the horses had already bolted. You're right, I agreed. We do need to talk. But first, I have a question for you. She looked up, expectant, probably thinking this was going to be some kind of marriage counseling moment. Were you ever alone with Tommy when he stayed here 20 years ago? I asked, watching her face intently. The color drained from her cheeks so fast, it was like someone had flipped a switch. Her coffee cup began to tremble in her hands. Why? Why are you asking me that? Tiffany whispered. Because I need to know if my brother was Jaden's father, I said, sliding the DNA results across the table between us. She stared at the paper as if it were a venomous snake, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. David, I can explain, Tiffany began, but I held up my hand to stop her. 20 years too late for explanations, I told her calmly, but not too late for consequences. Stephen's law office was exactly what you'd expect from a former Marine who'd traded his rifle for a briefcase. Clean lines, no frills, and a wall of commendations that reminded clients they were dealing with someone who understood discipline and strategy. All right, David, Stephen said, spreading documents across his conference table like a battle plan. Let's talk about what you're really up against here. 20 years of marriage, joint assets, 2 kids. This is going to get complicated fast. I slid a folder across the desk, one I had prepared that morning. Bank statements, investment accounts, the deed to our house, my retirement paperwork. 20 years of building what I thought was our future together. The house is in both our names, I explained, but I've made every single mortgage payment since day one. My military pension, my 401k, the life insurance policies, even the cars, it's all tied to my income. Stephen nodded, jotting notes on a legal pad. And what about her income from the dental practice? That's just it, I said, leaning back in the chair. I started thinking about it this morning. Her hours, her pay stubs, the stories about working late. Something doesn't add up. You think she's lying about work too? Stephen asked. I think she's lying about everything, I replied. And I want you to hire a private investigator to find out exactly what role Brad Morrison has played in all of this. Stephen raised an eyebrow. Brad Morrison? Should I know that name? He's been in our social circle for about 6 months, I explained. Shows up at the neighborhood barbecues. Volunteers at the school fundraisers. Always has a joke and a cooler of beer. Tiffany lights up around him like it's Christmas morning. And you think he's the guy? Stephen asked, already picking up his phone. I think he's the reason Jaden suddenly holds me in such contempt, I said. Kids don't just decide their fathers are worthless overnight. Someone has been feeding him that narrative. Stephen made a call to a private detective he'd worked with before, a guy named Pat, who specialized in domestic cases. While he was arranging surveillance on Tiffany and Brad, I was already planning my next move. Here's what I want to do, I told Stephen after he hung up. I want to move fast and quiet, establish an irrevocable trust for all my assets with you and 2 other Marines I trust as the trustees. Transfer everything out of the joint accounts before she realizes what's happening. That's aggressive, Stephen cautioned. She could fight it in court. Let her fight, I said. But she'll be fighting with lawyers she can't afford, while I'll be protected by the Marine Brotherhood and 20 years of documented contributions to everything we own. Stephen smiled, the kind of smile that reminded me why he'd been such an effective platoon leader. You know, David, he said, I think it's time we show these people what happens when you mess with a Marine's family. We spent the next 3 hours drafting paperwork, transferring funds, and building a legal fortress that would protect everything I had worked for. By the time I left his office, Tiffany's access to our shared life was already being systematically revoked. The war had officially begun, and I intended to win it. I waited until Sunday dinner to spring my trap. Tiffany had made her famous pot roast, the kind of meal that used to make me feel grateful for our family life. Now, it only reminded me of all the dinners she'd sat across from me, lying with a smile. Jaden was just pushing his food around his plate, checking his phone every 30 seconds as if he had somewhere more important to be. Mateo was telling us about his baseball team's chances of winning the regional championship, genuinely excited about something that didn't involve screens or attitude. Actually, Jaden, I said, picking up a folder I had placed beside my chair, I have something for you. An early inheritance. Tiffany's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. Mateo looked curious. Jaden finally looked up from his phone, interested for the first time in months. What kind of inheritance? Jaden asked, his tone suspicious, but intrigued. I slid a flat, wrapped box across the table to him. It was about the size of a picture frame, covered in plain brown paper with no tape or bow. There was nothing ceremonial about it. Open it, I said simply. Jaden tore at the paper with the impatience of a 20-year-old who'd grown up getting everything he wanted. Inside was a simple black frame holding a single sheet of paper on official letterhead. His face cycled through a series of expressions as he read: confusion, recognition, then something that might have been panic. What is this? Jaden whispered, staring at the DNA test results. Your inheritance, I answered calmly. The truth about who you really are and who you aren't. The color drained from Tiffany's face, her hand gripping her water glass like it was the only thing keeping her upright. I don't understand, Jaden said, but his voice told me he understood perfectly. It means your Uncle Tommy was more of a father to you than I ever was, I explained, my voice matter of fact. Because he was your father. Mateo was looking back and forth between all of us, trying to process what was happening. Smart kid, but this was probably beyond anything he'd expected from a Sunday. Dad, what's going on? Mateo asked quietly. What's going on, I told him, is that your brother has been treating me like dirt for years because he knew something I didn't. We don't share any DNA. Jaden's face had shifted from panic to anger, the kind of defensive fury people use when they're caught in a lie. So what? Jaden shot back, his voice rising. You think that changes anything? Brad Morrison is more of a father than you've ever been. There it was, the confirmation I'd been waiting for. Jaden knew exactly what he was saying, and he meant every word. Well then, I replied calmly, Brad Morrison can pay for your college, your car, your cell phone, everything. Because that's what happens when you tell a man he's not your real father. You get what you ask for. The silence that followed was deafening. Tiffany was sobbing into her napkin. Jaden was staring at the DNA results as if they might change if he looked hard enough. And Mateo was watching me with something that looked like respect. From here on out, I continued, you can call Brad Morrison Dad full time. He can handle all your expenses and your problems. Good luck with that. I stood up, leaving my half-eaten dinner, and walked out of the room. Behind me, I could hear Jaden finally finding his voice, screaming questions that were 20 years too late for answers. The first sign that Tiffany realized something was truly wrong came 3 days after my Sunday dinner revelation. She tried to use our joint credit card at the grocery store, the same card she'd used for 20 years without a second thought. It was declined. I was in my garage when she stormed through the door, her face a mask of crimson, a mixture of shame and fury. David! Tiffany yelled, waving the credit card like evidence in a courtroom. What did you do to our accounts? I looked up from the carburetor I was rebuilding, my hands steady despite the satisfaction coursing through my veins. I protected my assets, I answered calmly, like any smart business owner would do, upon discovering their partner was embezzling from the company. Embezzling? Tiffany's voice rose an octave. I'm your wife. You asterisk were asterisk my wife, I corrected, setting down my wrench. Now you're the mother of my brother's child and Brad Morrison's girlfriend. Different job description, different benefits package. She stared at me as if I'd grown a second head, probably trying to figure out how the man she'd manipulated for 20 years had suddenly grown a spine. You can't just cut me off, Tiffany protested. I have rights. We're married. And you have responsibilities too, I reminded her. Like fidelity, like honesty, like not raising another man's child on my dime while treating me like garbage. My phone buzzed with a text from Stephen. The surveillance photos were in. Perfect timing. Speaking of responsibilities, I continued, pulling out my phone and showing her the first picture Pat had taken. Why don't you explain to me what Brad Morrison was doing leaving our house at 2 in the morning last Tuesday? Tiffany's face went white. The photo was crystal clear. Brad, sneaking out the back door, looking around nervously before heading to his car. It's not what it looks like, Tiffany stammered. I swiped to the next photo. Brad and Tiffany kissing in the parking lot of a downtown hotel. And this? I asked conversationally. Then another. Tiffany getting into his car after work when she was supposed to be at the dental office. Or this. David, please, Tiffany begged, tears starting to well up. Let me explain. Brad and I, we're not. It's complicated. Actually, it's quite simple, I said, putting my phone away. You've been cheating on me with Brad Morrison while passing off my dead brother's son as my own. And you both expected to treat me like a fool. The only complicated part was figuring out how to make you pay for it. Mateo appeared at the garage door, his baseball uniform dirty from practice. Dad, he said quietly, is everything okay in here? I looked at my real son, the one who had stood by me through all this chaos. It's fine, buddy, I assured him. Your mother and I are just discussing some changes to our living arrangements. Tiffany glanced between me and Mateo, probably realizing for the first time that she was about to lose everything that mattered. Where am I supposed to go? She whispered. I hear Brad Morrison has a nice place, I suggested. Maybe he has room for 2 guests. Mateo found me in the garage later that night, long after Tiffany had locked herself in the bedroom and Jaden had disappeared to wherever kids go when their world falls apart. Dad, Mateo said, sitting on the old milk crate I kept as an extra seat. Can I ask you something? Shoot, man. You're really not Jaden's dad? He asked, his voice lower than usual. I put down the socket wrench I was pretending to organize and gave my youngest son my full attention. Biologically, no, I told him honestly. Your Uncle Tommy was his father, but I raised him for 20 years. I loved him like he was my own. I tried to teach him right from wrong. And he knew, Mateo pressed. He knew the whole time? He did, I confirmed. And instead of valuing what we had, he used it as ammunition to make me feel worthless. Mateo nodded slowly, processing this information like the smart kid he was. So what happens now? Now, I explained, Jaden gets to find out what it's like to depend on people who aren't legally obligated to care about him. And you and I get to figure out what our family looks like without all the lies and manipulation. Are we going to have to move? Mateo wondered, looking around the garage that had been his second home for years. No, I said firmly. This house belongs to us. I've made every payment since before you were born. Your mother and Jaden will be the ones finding new places to live. Mateo was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked at me with something that could have been admiration. Dad, he said, I'm proud of you. Those 4 words hit me harder than any punch I'd ever taken. Here was my son, my real son, proud of me for standing up for myself, for our family. I'm proud of you too, buddy, I told him. You've been loyal and honest through all of this. That means everything to me. So what are we going to do tomorrow? Mateo asked. Tomorrow, I said, we start building our new life. Just the two of us. No more lies. No more disrespect. No more walking on eggshells around people who don't appreciate what they have. Mateo smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him in months. Can we still work on the Mustang together? Son, I said, putting my arm around his shoulders, we've got all the time in the world. Outside, I could hear Tiffany on the phone, probably calling Brad Morrison or her sister. Anyone who could help her figure out how to undo the mess she'd made. But in here, in the garage with my real son, planning our future without the dead weight of betrayal and lies, I felt lighter than I had in years. The Collins family was about to get a lot smaller, but a whole lot stronger. 3 months after the divorce papers were finalized, I was rebuilding the transmission on a '69 Camaro when Mateo burst into the garage with news that made me grin for the first time in weeks. Dad, Mateo called, practically bouncing with excitement. You are not going to believe what happened with Jaden and Brad Morrison. I wiped my hands on a shop rag and gave him my full attention. What's the story, buddy? So, you know how Jaden moved in with Brad after Mom couldn't afford her apartment anymore? Mateo started, settling onto his favorite milk crate. I nodded. After Tiffany lost access to all the joint accounts, she'd been forced into a small studio apartment across town. Jaden chose to live with Brad Morrison rather than downgrade his lifestyle. Well, apparently Brad got arrested last week, Mateo continued. Tax evasion. The IRS froze all his accounts and seized his house. Jaden had to move back in with Mom in that tiny apartment. Tax evasion, I repeated, though I wasn't entirely surprised. Stephen's investigator had found some interesting irregularities in Brad's finances. It gets better, Mateo said with a grin. Jaden called Mom, crying about how he can't afford college now that his new father figure is in legal trouble. And guess what Mom told him? Enlighten me. She told him to call you and apologize, Mateo said, pulling out his phone. He actually left you a voicemail. You want to hear it? Curious, despite myself, I nodded. Jaden's voice, trembling and desperate, crackled through the speakerphone. Dad, it's me. I know I messed up. I know I said horrible things and treated you terribly. Mom told me about Uncle Tommy, about everything. I was angry and confused, and I took it out on you when you were just trying to be a father to me. Brad's gone. We lost the house, and I don't know what to do. Could we, could we maybe talk? I really need my dad right now. I listened to the message twice, a complex mix of satisfaction and sorrow swirling inside me. The same boy who told me Brad Morrison was more of a father than I ever was. Now, he was crawling back because his real meal ticket had vanished. What are you going to do? Matthew asked carefully. I thought about it for a long moment, considering the young man who'd spent 20 years enjoying the benefits of being my son while rejecting every responsibility that came with it. I'm going to finish this transmission, I said finally, turning back to my work. Then we'll take the Camaro for a test drive, just you and me. You're not going to call him back? Matthew asked. No, I replied, selecting the right socket from the wrench set. Jaden made his choice when he decided Brad Morrison was his father. Now, he can live with the consequences of that choice. Matthew was silent for a moment, then gave a slow nod of approval. You know something, Dad, he said. I think that's exactly what Uncle Tommy would have wanted you to do. Smart kid. He knew some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt with a desperate phone call and crocodile tears. 2 years later, I was putting the finishing touches on a custom motorcycle in my garage when Matu walked in, wearing his high school cap and gown. The kid had shot up 6 inches and gained the kind of confidence that comes from being raised by someone who genuinely values you. Ready for the ceremony, old man? Mathieu teased, adjusting his cap. Wouldn't miss it for the world, I replied, wiping my hands on a rag. Class valedictorian. I'm damn proud of that. Couldn't have done it without my study partner, Mathieu said, gesturing around the garage where we'd spent countless nights doing homework between mechanical projects. Speaking of accomplishments, I said, handing him an envelope. This came in the mail yesterday. Mathieu opened it carefully, his eyes widening as he read the contents. A full ride to the Colorado School of Mines, he said, his voice filled with disbelief. Dad, this is incredible. An engineering scholarship with room and board, everything. Turns out, having a father who actually supports your education makes a difference, I noted. The admissions counselor was impressed with your essay about learning mechanical principles in a real-world environment. Matu pulled me into a tight hug, the kind of embrace that says everything you need to know about your relationship with your son. And you? Matu asked. What will you do with me gone? Keep building things, I said simply. Maybe travel a bit. Stephen keeps talking about taking a motorcycle trip through the Rockies. Have you heard anything? Matu started, then stopped, not wanting to bring up a sore subject on such a happy day. About Jaden and his mother? I finished for him. Last I heard, Tiffany was working 2 jobs to make rent on a studio apartment. Jaden dropped out of community college when he couldn't get financial aid. Something about not having a legal guardian who could co-sign for loans. Do you ever regret it? Matu asked quietly. I thought about it, truly considered it. Matu deserved an honest answer. No, I said finally. I regret the 20 years I wasted trying to earn the respect of people who would never give it. I regret not standing up for myself sooner. But I don't regret protecting what we've built together. I gestured around the garage, at the projects we'd completed, the tools we'd organized, the memories we'd made. This is what a real father-son relationship looks like, I continued. Built on mutual respect, honest communication, and genuine affection. Not by biology or legal obligation, but by choice. Every day, you and I choose to be family, and I'd choose you every single time, Mateo said firmly. Same here, son. Same here. As we headed to his graduation ceremony, I reflected on how much had changed since that Sunday dinner when my world fell apart. I'd lost a wife who never truly loved me and a son who was never really mine. But I had gained something infinitely more valuable, a real relationship with someone who truly appreciated what I had to offer. The Collins family was smaller now, but it was built on a foundation of truth instead of lies, respect instead of manipulation, and love instead of obligation. And that was more than enough.